Right, okay, this is the special, and this is about the subversion of the Constitution. And we've got everybody in the house tonight. We've got the Gazelle. Say hello.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome back from Greece.
Yes, thank you, Trevor Nichols. And we have Statsman, who's going to be leading on this. Here we go, a.k.a. Mark Hartley. Say hello.
Hello.
Oh, that was very good. That's all we needed. And again, the Raven. Okay, say hello, Steve.
Good evening, gentlemen, and good evening to all freedom fighters and defenders of the Constitution across the country.
Power to the people.
Like that.
Do you remember? Who are you, Steve? Are you Wolfie? Do you remember that? Citizen Smith.
Commie. No,
Citizen
not Wolfie at all.
And his mother-in-law used to call him Foxy, or his potential mother-in-law.
Foxy, yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, there we go.
Brilliant.
Okay. Made it out. Right, okay, well, I'll give you a quick introduction to this, and then we're going to let Mark move on it. Okay, what we're talking about here is the erosion of constitutional law in the UK. Parliament and political parties are at fault. That's what we're saying. That's the proposition. So, the United Kingdom, renowned for its rich constitutional history, has long prided itself on the adherence to the rule of law and democratic principles. However, in recent years, there has been a growing concern over the erosion of constitutional law in the UK, with Parliament and political parties playing a significant role in this deterioration. This article that we're doing tonight aims to shed light on how these institutions have contributed to the weakening of constitutional law and the potential consequences that may arise as a result. Take it away, Statsman.
Thank you very much. I think this goes back a lot longer than the last several years, but I'll start with English law is part of our Indigenous identity. It's got to be, hasn't it?
Yeah.
And you've got to start from the conception of England. We can argue about natural law, God's law, and all this stuff, but for now, I'm just going to deal with what's in front of us. And it's evolved over 1,000 years. It started with Alfred's version of the common law, basically. He went round all the different kingdoms in England, took the best laws, added stuff from the Bible, etc. And then we ended up being a constitutional monarchy, which in my opinion, probably the best system by far. But it's had its ups and downs along the way with obvious resets, which is normally to withstand tyranny. Examples being Magna Carta, the Bill of Rights and the Glorious Revolution. Now, as we mentioned on the part one of this, it's withstood attacks internally and externally. You've got Brexit, the 2019 election. I actually think this now is one of those times in history where we need a reset, because in my opinion, I think Parliament has been hijacked by political parties and the English constitutional law has been destroyed. Adding to that, we've got these globalist attacks to dictate our laws and finances and the obvious Marxists in our midst. So I think maybe we should start with how Parliament and political parties have destroyed constitutional law. Now, I'll start with parliamentary supremacy. Now, this is a myth. If you look at the Bill of Rights and one of its main orchestrators, which is a man called John Somers, the first Baron Somers, now they both say that power has not been taken away from the king and handed to Parliament. This is a lie. And we have early traditions from the monarchy going back thousands of years to say they are not above the law. And often, sometimes when they try to, there's often a pushback. So you can refer to our special we did, was it last year, I think?
Yeah, because when you said that, Mark, what you're saying is that the Constitution and the sovereignty of Parliament, blah, 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 has been weaponized by the political parties to push their own agendas. Sorry, I just wanted to get that clarification.
Yeah. I'll let Steve come in a sec. But as the Bill of Rights says, the Crown retains all powers, prerogatives it held before the Glorious Revolution. It's kind of a safety net for bad legislation made by Parliament. And monarchs do have the choice to say no to laws, to legislation. But recent monarchs have distanced themselves from it, adding to the illusion that Parliament hold power. The last one was Anne in 1708. So power was never absolute. And you have contemporary writers from pre-Magna Carta up to William Blackstone explaining things like William the Conqueror as an example. He came, took the crown, but he adhered to our laws. And the same for William of Orange during the Glorious Revolution.
Okay.
I'll let someone else come in now.
Go on, Steve.
Mark mentioned at the outset the laws enshrined in our system. However, at the outset, these were based on fundamental, keyword, and Mark's mentioned it in the past and so have I, natural laws. And these were heavily influenced by firmly held beliefs, not only in the Bible, but basically natural laws. In other words, I suppose you could frame it as good and evil in its most basic sense. But these natural laws, if adhered to, do work. And there has to be some fundamental reasons for that, because they are natural truths. They are fundamental principles and truths about how we are as a race, a human race, about what we are about and how we should live. Now, since then, what's happened is our society has drifted away from that with an excess of liberalism. And we have covered this over the past 2 years extensively, where everybody is now bewildered as to what their identity is as an individual, as a family, as a community, as a country.
Well, they're under attack. That's what they are.
Right. So there's a reason for this. Now, this goes back to the early 1830s. And if you look at sort of social philosophers like Jeremy Bentham, this is when it started to change, because Jeremy Bentham was all about the greatest happiness to the greatest number. In other words, whatever, irrespective of whether it was good or bad or whether it worked for society as a whole, it was whether it was acceptable to the vast majority of people and brought about the most amount of happiness to the most amount of people. Now, that's where you get kicking into the frame this liberalism. So our parliament became heavily influenced by social philosophers seeking to play around, adjust and manipulate the fundamental truths and natural laws that govern us as a people, as a human race, through our constitutional formation, through the Bible, through our laws, and through our parliamentary system and everything else, and the Bill of Rights and Magna Carta that we're all talking about. But since the 1830s, particularly for about 100 years after that time, social philosophers like Bentham and others brought about this swift change that heavily influenced the parliamentary system and the lawmaking thereafter. And we need to talk about, at some point as well, we won't have time tonight, I don't think, to talk about the difference between a law and an act of parliament and legislation. We need to talk about that another time. That's a big issue. Well, that's the fundamental issue for me. We've drifted away from fundamental truths and natural laws, and society is now completely lost, and that's why our parliament no longer works.
Well, I will take that, and I will give a practical point of view on that. I actually think that the political party interests over the constitutional principles that you just said, I believe that that's led to rushed legislation, insufficient scrutiny, and a lack of checks and balances, ultimately undermining the rule of law, in my opinion. And
deliberate.
Okay. And I'm going to go across to the Gazelle, who's got a comment to make on that. And then we're going to move on to something else connected. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, that was a very, very interesting conversation from Steve there. Well done, Steve. Excellent.
Yeah, I didn't even know he could read.
No, I didn't. I mean, he's obviously, I think he's watched a YouTube video, because I can't see him just reading that bit. But anyway, to simplify it, yeah, he's showing paper there, but I think that's just blank anyway.
I thought it was toilet paper.
Well, it probably is. I mean, he speaks a load of...
and
no, but he did very well tonight.
Yeah, indeed.
Very interesting. That, yeah. Now, our constitution. So basically, it's just been taken out by this institution called the EU.
Yeah.
Is it all part and parcel of destroying everything that we are?
Yep.
That's what it seems to me.
Well, when you're ready, can you yield to Mr. Statsman?
I will certainly yield to Mr. Statsman. Yeah, that's all I wanted to say. That Steve, that was excellent.
That was excellent toilet paper. That was top quality toilet paper.
That was that. I actually listened to that, which I normally just mute him.
Yep. Go ahead, Statsman.
Yeah, like Trev says, we're being attacked from all angles, but sadly, it's come from within over time. So we've got the Glorious Revolution, which was the Bill of Rights. That was a win for the rule of law. And the documents that came from it, the Bill of Rights, was a restatement of common law and the contract between the king and the people to protect our rights, religion, and property. Now, even if it was a big con, which some people say it is, but I'm not going to get into that one, it's still in statute law, which is being ignored. Now, Steve said about the 1800s. Yeah, that was when political parties came in. But actually in the 1600s, it was Charles II. He scrapped the Privy Council, and then he got like a secret little collection of ministers. Now, that's where we get the cabinet from. Yeah. The cabinet is basically, it's not the government, it's the party, the political party, and they are private organisations who we have no say over.
Yeah,
that's not how it's meant to work. And then, like in the 1874, we got whipped parties.
Yeah,
and that is out of order.
Yeah,
because as we just said in, I think, the podcast this week, that's not working for the people. That's actually working for themselves. Now, Steve mentioned a way of thinking. We had a way of thinking that came in the 1800s as well by a guy called John Austin. Now, what he did is his ideology, it separated law and moral judgment. So in the common law, you have juries, which regardless if you've broken a piece of legislation, if they think it's not fair and just to convict you, then they can say no.
Yeah.
Now, the legal system are hiding this, but this has had a big influence. It was after he died, actually. I think his wife republished his book. And basically, he saw it as laws, rules, types of commands. The population obey the sovereign. Now, that used to be the king, but now they've got it into the heads. It's Parliament. So zero moral judgment. And as I say, he became really influential, actually. And he got right down to the general level of how legal theory and law were taught in the late 1800s, early 1900s. So that's changed everyone's minds about when they're making this legislation. And that's now why we have literally got laws micromanaging everything in our lives.
Okay, can I move the subject on? I just want to bring up something that I think is quite important, and then I'll give way to Steve. And I think that the judiciary have been politicized. And one of my primary concerns in the erosion of constitutional law in the UK is the politicization of the judiciary. I think there's too close a relationship between government and the judiciary. The appointment and promotion of judges influenced by political considerations, compromising independence, impartiality, And I mean, you can see that in America, within their constitution, when they appoint, judges, to both local, federal, and national institutions. It all goes on behind the scenes over here, and I think that is also causing a problem because the judiciary are supposed to safeguard constitutional rights and interpret laws without bias. But I'm not seeing that at the moment. Go ahead, Mark.
You've got this problem, like I just mentioned. Judges are setting precedents. That is not their role. Their role really is to just oversee proceedings and make sure everything goes as it's meant to. It's meant to be the juries who decide what is fair and just in their society.
Yeah.
If you listen to James Wilson, I think he was one of the ones who was involved in the American Constitution. He said something to that effect too. And then, so because these judges are setting precedents, you're not actually getting, so another thing, a common law of the right to a trial. Okay. Now it's gone. If you go in family law courts or contempt of court, or say magistrates, for example, you're not getting trial by jury. They are trashing this constitution. They're trashing Magna Carta, and they're trashing the Bill of Rights, which actually, with going back to the party method, the Bill of Rights states we must have free elections, but we don't have the freedom to nominate candidates or the freedom to have an elected representative free from party influence because they hold a monopoly.
Well, the politics have become partisan, really, haven't they?
Yeah, they have. And just back to the common law rights and customs of our country are just being eroded. Okay. We lost grand juries, didn't we?
Yep.
That was sad.
When you're ready, will you give way to Steve?
Yeah,
sorry.
I sure will. Go on, the Raven.
Yeah, first point is Mark mentioned there common law at some point, I think, and Magna Carta. Now, he also said that we have this endless thousands and thousands of sort of micromanaging laws or legislation implemented to control every aspect of our lives.
Of it.
Magna Carta under common law says you've only ever broken the law if you have ever committed harm, injury, or loss to somebody under common law, under Magna Carta, right? So that's the first point. So our laws, basically, if you go back to fundamental truths, which we were talking about earlier, that's what it is. Basically, harm, injury, or loss. Second point is this.
Is that what we call, just a quick question to you, Mark, is that what we call natural justice when we're talking about that?
No, it's common law. It's common law.
Yeah, I don't want to get into the debate of all this because it will take us another hour. But all I'm trying to do is just look at what's in front of us and the history. And I just think it's a little naive if there's certain people who say they're a sovereign person and they're totally ignoring everything else that goes on.
Yep.
Now, in an ideal world, that'd be great. But in front of us, the enemy are using legislation and they're ignoring our constitutional documents. And I think if we just separate ourselves from that, doing ourselves a disservice. We need to use everything at our disposal to attack them, even their own laws. It'd be brilliant to work like that, but it's something's got to be in stone for us to follow. And since we're in England, that's why I was looking at English law. But yeah, Steve's right. It's a natural thing, but then is it one person's idea of natural law is different from another? Because if it's God's law, you've got different gods. So
yield back to the Raven. Go ahead, Rave.
Yeah, I understand what Mark is saying there, but in short, truth is truth, and fundamental principles are exactly that. The problem that we have now, Mark, which you're recognising, is that there are other people, other agencies who've come in over the past a couple of 100 years, in particular in this country, the past 100 years, to subvert our natural laws and natural justice. Not only that, our identity and our heritage and many other things, but Jonathan used a very interesting phrase. He feels that there are things going on behind the scenes. Well, let me tell you, that's true. Because for the past, I think about 30 years, there are organisations operating in this country which, as we've mentioned before, have infiltrated every single authority in this country, every single institution, to undermine them, including, as you said earlier, the justice system, the education system, everything. Now, we'll come back at another point to things we were talking about earlier, at a later date, to do with the UN. But there are organisations in this country who are Marxist-led, and the Marxist influence has been heavily loaded behind the scenes in this country for 100 years to destroy this country, and it's now getting a serious grip. You can see the erosion of the very fabric of this country. And the final point I want to make very quickly is this, which is an important one. I think Mark mentioned family law courts.
Yeah.
Now, for anybody who knows anything about these, they are unlawful because
they close off everything.
They do not take place, usually, to my knowledge, in a court with the judge's crest above his head, with a real jury, everything else. It takes place in secret courts with authorities, bodies making decisions outside of the law.
Okay.
Now, those family courts need to be looked at in this country.
Okay. Quick comment from Mark, and then Trevor is going to wrap this up. Oh, go ahead, Trevor. Go ahead. Mark is yielding to you, sir.
Thank you, Mark. Yeah, you've got basically, as a summary, to bring it back to modern times, you've got the major laws are all being ignored through time, basically. And now you've got the council laws, which was what we was on about in one of our previous podcasts.
Correct.
They're being ignored. So as regards local councils, in fact, the whole system just failing. It's falling apart.
It's rotten.
It's being deliberately pulled to pieces, Trevor.
How are we going to reverse it, Steve?
Education, the only way.
Well, we're going to touch on that at the end, I think.
Okay.
But again, did Steve mention
that's good.
Private organisations? The problem is we don't have control over them. It's like, for instance, Conservative members did not have control over voting for Rishi. This is just another thing that's evolved over time.
Yeah, he's an unelected prime minister.
And the Parliament are claiming their power. They've got the power because they're voted in. They're elected. It doesn't work like that. But yeah, how are we going to fix this? I mean, we've got to fight for our constitution, our freedoms for a start, which is what we're doing. I think, did someone just mention educate? We've got to educate the young people on how this whole system's meant to work.
Yeah.
And we've got to use every tool at our disposal. I'd actually recommend, and I don't know how easy this would be, but I think we need another reset. We need another document like the Bill of Rights, which is going to protect us from Parliament this time. It's been the king in the past, but I think Parliament have got too powerful now.
Yeah.
we need to reaffirm our common law customs. Bringing back things like grand jury is going to be difficult. I don't know how to deal with the judiciary. They're hiding so many things like jury annulment.
That's right.
How are we going to fix it? I think we need punishments as well,
Well,
oaths, like Trevor was saying, they're all breaking their oaths and the policies. We need punishments for that. I think we need to be able to petition the king again, because that was the only little safety net.
The
judiciary were letting it down. And an all-English parliament too.
Okay, all right. Let's bring that to a close, because we said that we were not going to go on and on and on. I'll give a conclusion to this, which I think that everybody will be happy with. What we're saying is the erosion of constitutional law in the UK, it's a multifaceted issue. And that's what the point that Stats is getting across. It's why
it's so hard to combat again.
It's difficult, with significant consequences for the country's democratic fabric and the rights of its citizens. Parliament and political parties bear responsibility for this deterioration, whether through the politicisation of the judiciary, the dominance of party interests over constitutional principles, the absence of comprehensive constitutional protections, or the volatility of partisan politics. Addressing these challenges will require a concerted effort to prioritise the rule of law, which is what Statsman is saying. Strengthen the independence of the judiciary and engage in a meaningful discussion about the need for constitutional reforms, which is what we put here. Only through such measures can the UK hope to restore and preserve the integrity of its constitutional framework for generations to come. What a conclusion, yeah? Okay, yeah. Well then, say goodnight, everybody. Steve, put that pen down. Okay.
Yeah, I agree totally with that. Now, what amazes me is that Steve keeps waving his pen around, and we all know that he can't read and write.
I know, I can't get it. That's what I know.
Yeah, I mean, that's not a... how can I say it? It's not...
You've been bamboozled by everything that's going on. Just say goodnight.
Good night.
There we go. Say goodbye, Raven. No more. Just say goodbye.
Goodbye, gentlemen.
There you go. Statsman, thank you very much for your input on that.
I just wish people would have listened to William Pitt about 300 years ago when he said the tyranny of parliamentary sovereignty would be reimposed.
Indeed.
Yeah. Good night, everyone.
Okay, take it easy. Very, very good conversation. I thought my conclusion was the best.
I was having the final word anyway.
A big shout out to all the defenders of freedom and constitution across the United Kingdom. Rise up!
Totally agree with you. Can't beat constitution.